If altcoins were dating profiles, which one would you ghost first, or which one would ghost you first?
I think the community matters a lot more because if you think about the altcoins that are actually successful right now, nothing really comes to mind. Technical indicators are even just based on trends.
The hype is the market now. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm Paul with Hola Prime X. Today, we're diving into the most important and often overwhelming questions in the world of crypto trading. How do you actually choose the right altcoin? In this episode, we're going to attempt to explore how to spot altcoins with real potential, how to weigh volatility against upside, and of course, how professional traders prop firms manage exposure across the sea of digital assets we all have to trade. So let's get into it. Grant, great to have you back in the chair. Always a treat to have your insights. How you been?
I've been doing good. It's always good to be here. It's always interesting to talk about altcoins, talk about crypto, and just kind of chop it up for a few minutes.
Chop it up indeed. Right. So I had this quite amusing question, which we just talked about before. Just to kick things off as an icebreaker, if altcoins were dating profiles, which one would you ghost first, or which one would ghost you first, right? Any idea?
Yeah, I remember last time we talked about Reef. We talked about Reef. It came out of nowhere. It was gaining like 100% per day. Everybody was talking about it. And then it gained like 300% per day. Everybody went long, and then it crashed down lower than it had ever been, liquidating everybody I know.
Oh
Honestly, I
no.
can't think of a better fit than that one.
No, that pretty much hits the nail on the head. So, so obviously, I mean, do you think altcoins can altcoins truly succeed in the long term if its community is stronger than, say, the tech? So what that kind of means is, like, obviously there's a lot of hype-driven tokens. In the previous podcast, we were talking about this, about meme coins. But in 2025, do we need a strong community or a strong use case, do you think?
I think the community matters a lot more because if you think about the altcoins that are actually successful right now and you try to think about what the actual tech they have is, nothing really comes to mind. It seems like the community is kind of the most important part because it's really just the virality aspect. If you think about, any kind of product marketing, the most successful ones are just the ones that most people know about. And the bigger the community, the more people know about it. So I really do think that community matters so much more than the tech because most people just don't even care about it in general.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's interesting how the space is shaping up. And obviously, on the back of what we were just talking about in the last podcast, meme coins being kind of the retail sandbox at the moment. I mean, so do you think trading altcoins is more of an art or maybe a social science at this point? I mean, what do you reckon?
Well, I mean, a lot of them still follow traditional technical analysis, so it's kind of independent from both being an art and being a social aspect. But I feel like if you understand which ones are trending, which ones are getting that kind of virality aspect, and which ones are going to be big as far as the community, it is going to give you some sort of an advantage because that does sometimes trump the actual technical indicators.
Yeah, and I think so. When I first got into trading, it was a very different landscape. We had we didn't really have many USDT pairs. We just had a lot of BTC pairs with some of the
You had
altcoins.
crypto back then?
Yes, we did. We did just. It was an idea. It was a concept
Right.
in the eye of somebody. Yeah, no, absolutely. But it changes every cycle, doesn't it? I mean, the last cycle where I was investing in, which peaked in 2021, this cycle's been completely different. And what would be your advice, perhaps, to new traders coming in the market, trying to make sense of these simple questions like, what altcoins do we trade? What don't we trade? I mean, what advice would you give, do you think?
We talked a little bit about this last time, and I think all of them are still tradable. And they do most oftentimes still follow traditional technical analysis. If you know how to trade anything, you would know roughly how to trade them. However, there is exceptions, things like Reef, coins that are going to go their own way, whether that's extremely bullish or bearish. And one thing that we talked about last time that I think still stands as far as what to stay away from is if they've made it through 2 to 3 cycles already, they're going to be definitely tradable and they're going to give you some extra opportunities compared to just Bitcoin and Ethereum based on technical indicators or even just based on trends. But if they are younger than that, you could still trade them based on those things, but you have to be extremely careful because that's where the kind of shocking events can happen where they're a little bit more unpredictable, disconnected from just the actual chart themselves and more connected to outside factors like the creators, the company behind it, um, or anything that gets shared about them online.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing is that talking about having previous price history, that is something I always look for, of course, because you've got to think about how many you're looking at a chart and you've got a token which has maybe been around a year or so, but it hasn't been around the last cycle. So you don't have any historical price data or even the profit potential targets to go
Hmm.
off. Because if you're looking
Right.
to invest in Solana, right, which the last cycle really increased its market cap significantly, when you see the previous kind of highs it achieved in the last bull cycle, you've got something to trade off. And then, of course, more traders see that
Exactly.
and they're involved in the token. And
Right.
when you don't have that multi-time frame kind of confluence for a
Mm.
setup, which is part of TA. So I suppose what does define success in a market where fundamentals often lose to hype? So we're looking at a token perhaps which doesn't have any price history and it's making people really rich. Like how do we kind of find the middle ground, do you think?
Yeah. Well, I see what you're talking about as far as like using the past price history to kind of give you an idea of what's going to happen in the long term. But in the short term, for the trades that are lasting, minutes to days, that really kind of becomes irrelevant because you could imagine, like you mentioned Solana, you could imagine like using a volume profile from the last cycle, seeing where, for example, this cycle might top out, this cycle might have a little bit of a reversal. But if you're doing more of like the minute by minute, day by day trades, that isn't such an issue. But what you mentioned as far as kind of separating the fundamentals from the technicals, I think yes. For example, Bitcoin and Ethereum are going to follow the fundamentals a lot more than the trends and the memes that you see online. Of course, they're still going to be affected by things like big news, political, economical news. But there's going to be, especially with those minute by minute, day by day trades, they're going to be a lot more tradable based on the fundamentals. But still, that's only two options really that are guaranteed not to do, for example, what Reef did. So two options is not going to give you all the setups that the market has. We're lucky that we have so many different coins and options to trade from. So there's no reason not to look at other coins who have a decent amount of price history just to determine that they're safe fish. Right. If they've been through two cycles, chances are they're pretty established. So it's really not for planning what's going to happen in, for example, a month time frame, but really just kind of seeing how reputable the coin is.
Yeah. I think so. I think maybe this is a good place to start talking about warning signs. Speaking of reef, so what are we? What hard advice can we give to people? Like, what are the warning signs that they can look for to try and remove themselves from an altcoin which may wreck them? And I'm just reminded of Mantra, which recently had like 100% crash just
Mm,
in 15 minutes, and we're
mm,
obviously trying to avoid people from trading those
right.
and avoiding those. So warning signs for me are, you need to see who's paying attention to it. So you've got basic fundamentals like volume, of course. You can check out volume. You should be aware of the market cap. Previous volatility. Is the volatility manageable? I mean, what are your key kind of things you look for to avoid being wrecked by reefs, shall we say?
Right. I would say definitely stop loss is critical. And that's why the people that I know who were in Reef got wrecked is because they didn't have one and they were just kind of hoping it would come back because it's been, they've kind of been brainwashed by how bullish it is. They're like, oh, it's just having a little bit of a correction. It's gone up 500,000% in the past month. I'm sure this isn't anything to worry about. I'm just going to hold. And that is where a lot of people get wrecked because then you're just waiting for either it to come back to break even or hit your liquidation price, and neither of those are really places you want to be. It'd be so much better to just have a stop loss set up. Another thing is um, I would say not take into consideration the tech at all because Reef had some interesting tech. I don't remember exactly what they did. It was some kind of cross-platform technology, and it seemed like, okay, well, Reef, they've got a cool website, they've got some tech. I mean, you can't say the same for some of these even much bigger coins. So that must mean that they have something reputable going for them. But I would say that really does not matter at all. It's really more just one thing you could look at is the strength of the community. Reef really didn't have much of a community. It kind of came out of nowhere and nobody really knew what it is. They're just trading it because it was pumping so much. Having a big community kind of gives you some sign that they've done the work as marketers. And usually, if they're big enough and they've done that work, it's a pretty reputable coin. Obviously, there is still that rule of thumb. If it's made it through multiple cycles, it is a lot more. It has a lot more kind of safety net to it because it's got that not only price history, but it also just has that time history showing that it's existed for long enough to, if they were going to use it to just get super rich, they probably would have done it by now.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, credibility since simply because they've been around and haven't screwed
Yep.
anybody, I suppose, is the thing, right?
Yep.
Um, yeah, the other thing is in terms of the more positive aspects. I mean, yeah, obviously risk management is important, fundamentally speaking. Um, it's kind of easy to be a bit blasé about trading really high caps like Bitcoin because you're not going to have 100% crash, right? Fingers
Mhm.
crossed.
Right.
But
But
you
you're also
also,
not going to be, you're also going to be trading according to that. You'd be using bigger position size, more leverage. So, I mean, I would say it's still just as important there. Because
yeah, absolutely. But
you
that's
could
the
get
thing.
wrecked just as much as far as your dollar amount, even if it only moves, a couple percent.
And that's the key point, isn't it? It's know what you're trading, and risk management, of course, isn't just having a stop loss or a stop loss in the right position. It's bearing in mind: are you going to scale in? Are you going to use what kind of position size you're going to use in? I mean, practically speaking, I mean, outside of prop trading, it's very difficult to engage with a lot of the ultra low cap tokens because if you try and come on with more than about $50 to $100, you're just going to have your money stolen when you move the market. So there's a lot of things to consider. The other thing I thought I'm interested to talk to you about, Grant, is that in order to offset risk and to get confluence when trading altcoins, there's also like some altcoins move together. So, as an example, SUI, SUI, and Ethereum, and Solana, and ADA, they all fundamentally have their blockchains, and a lot of things are built off them. So, SUI has a lot of meme coins in the space as well, but which means you can sometimes find these partnerships where some tokens will move together. And if you see one moving, typically if they're part of the same project umbrella, another one will move. I mean, what's your thoughts? Because I use Bitcoin obviously to as a barometer for the market weather to determine which direction I should be trading in the altcoins. But what about using ADA or SUI as kind of the king to monitor to see what their movements are, and then look for some of the altcoins under their umbrella? And I mean, do you do anything like that? Do you consider these sort of subtle partnerships between tokens, the pegging between two tokens?
I respect what you say about kind of using Bitcoin as the barometer because I feel like if you're using these tokens, you're kind of getting not really the most granular data. You're kind of getting the blurry data. Bitcoin is the most granular data. You know everything is going to kind of build off of what Bitcoin is doing, or at least you can expect it to. So when you're going through kind of that chain where you have Bitcoin and then you have the altcoins and then you have the altcoins under them, you're not looking at really the best source of data, which is just to look straight at Bitcoin. So no, I don't do anything like that. I would just say if you're going to use it to get some sort of a bias, you should just go straight to the king. That's most likely going to lead them all.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what I do. But I have seen some of my students, they're recognizing that the market is changing and they're looking for that additional edge. And I think this is the fun. It doesn't really matter what you do. And I agree, everyone should not be ignoring Bitcoin. It doesn't matter what you're paying attention to. Bitcoin is king, and that's what you never want to ignore it. But there are tokens which do move together. And I know some students, it's not my thing. They look for this. They wait for one to move, excuse me. They wait for one to move and then the other, and then they'll enter a trade on the other one. Now, in terms of altcoins, it's obviously a case of trying to get that edge, always trying to get that edge with probabilities with TA. And a lot of the frustration I find as a trader is I'll have a great setup on an altcoin. Like there's a great setup right now with ICP, right? But I need Bitcoin to play along, or I need whatever's going on with that
Mhm.
to play along as well. And so it's always trying to, how do I manage this? How do I manage risk? So um, let's maybe let's keep with risk management for a moment. So um, if you look at, so say Grant, you're looking at trading an altcoin, right? What are you fundamentally looking for first, right? Before you'll enter it, right? Forget TA. What are you fundamentally looking for?
Well, usually, if I'm being honest, it's whether or not I've heard of it before. Because a lot of times We can be, for example, like scrolling through TradingView and we'll see like, oh, that's a setup and it does fit my strategy. And you don't really pay attention to what it is. Like, you look maybe in the top left to see the name of it, type it into the exchange and you're good to go. But I feel like that is where you can get burned the easiest because a lot of times those ones that you haven't heard of, they're going to have not only a trust issue where like there's a chance that it could pull a reef on you, but there's also a chance that the volume could just be so low that regardless of how proven your strategy is, it could just be so much less likely to play out on some of these low volume coins that kind of move independently and they don't really follow. Not only do they not follow Bitcoin, some of them, but some of them don't follow even traditional TA that's on their own chart because the volume is so low or even the volume is so high that they're just kind of in a world of their own. So one thing you could look at is, have I heard of this before? Have I traded this before? And yes, that's going to come over time. But if the answer is no, most of the time it might not be a smart place for you to be putting your money into.
Yeah, that's certainly one way of doing it. And that's the way a lot of people do it. And the thing is, I've got a question in front of me, which is, uh, do you believe, where is it? Well, the biggest. Uh, I've lost the question. I think the issue is I think we're talking about an old thing, which is, the hype is the market now, right? I think that's the point, right? The hype is the market right now. So for me, I'm obviously looking for technical fundamentals in an altcoin, but more importantly, I'm looking to see if the altcoin is supportive for a trade based on what I think Bitcoin could do next, right? So that's the way I approach it. I've been a little bit more grumpy about ignoring anything in my life where someone says, go look at that. If it's a TV show or anything, I'll ignore it because I don't like being a sheep. Now, obviously,
Yeah.
Grant, I am not suggesting a friend comes up to them and says, oh, you should trade Dogecoin, is a sheep. It's not that. But for me, it's always about don't date it, right? Just take your money and move on, essentially, is the way I look at it. But also, I have students which will trade the same things over and over again. They kind of fall in love with these tokens, and on the face of it, that sounds a bit silly. But the reality is, they become aware of the volatility. They become aware of how the price moves, and they have comfort in that. Because for me, when I'm hopping from token to token to do my weekly trade or whatever I'm doing, it's like I have to learn all over again, right? What is the
Mhm.
volatility? I have to do a lot of work into each chart. So I think genuinely what you said is potentially the best approach at this time in the market, at least until things shift. Just a
Right.
quick question about stop losses, though, because obviously I think you're very right to underscore the importance of stop losses. How would you put a stop loss in a highly volatile altcoin, which yesterday put in 40% swings, and you're looking to simply come in on a breakout trade, but you're worried it could go 40% in either direction? How do you manage that?
Very important to, in whatever charting software you're in, to use the percentage measurement tool. Because, I mean, yes, you can use ATR, but I feel like, I mean, it makes your chart look so messy, and most of the time you don't need it. But if you're looking at a chart, if you look at Bitcoin side by side to some altcoin, 4% for Bitcoin is going to look exactly the same as 40% for the altcoin because it's scaled. So if you're using the percentage tool, it's going to help you a lot manage your risk for one, because a lot of times when, for example, something has almost gapped up 40%, there really is no marker for you to put a stop loss. Like you could even look at the volume candles and see if there's like a POC candle somewhere, and you could say hypothetically, okay, well if it breaks below there, it's the trade is pretty much invalidated. The issue with that is most of the time when these coins explode or dump 40% or anything over 10%, there really is no POC candle. It's almost a super low volume candle or high volume. It's distributed evenly. There's really no good sticking point at anywhere in that massive gap for you to put a stop loss. So honestly, I would say if you're willing to trade something like that, you should really just use the percentage tool and figure out how much dollar amount you're willing to risk because there's oftentimes not a great technically based point to put your stop loss.
Yeah, and that becomes the challenge. And so stop losses for me are a technical thing, and they're going to be different based on whatever the fundamentals are, right? I want my stop loss protected by many different obstacles for the price action, right? But I also don't want a stop loss which is 30% down, right? That's not what I want, right? So,
Right.
we have it has to be a balance, and I think it was kind of a trap. It's kind of a trick question, I suppose, for the benefit of people watching. Because for me, if I can't find a good place to put my stop loss, and I start to be calculating like, well, how much am I prepared to lose? I shouldn't be trading it. I shouldn't be trading it.
It's true. It's true.
So, and I think that's probably the advice. I think if you look at altcoins and consider, and the benefit is, right, there is definitely more fish in the sea. You're never going to run out of something to trade. So being selective and using the sheer number of things we've got to trade in the altcoin market to whittle it down to the ones which have essentially got the best chance of being successful. And even if that just means this is the only one where I feel comfortable with my stop loss, right? And therefore I'm going to trade it, because we shouldn't be focusing on profit first. It should always be about protecting our capital. And if you approach altcoins in that way, and the same way with your altcoin, just recognize that, oh, I can't trade that. I mean, that's just done a 60% swing. I don't know I can't trade that. It's just too high risk. So therefore, leaving that alone. But what would you say to people who only trade Bitcoin and don't trade altcoins?
I would say I don't blame you at all. You have a lot of discipline, and I respect you a lot.
I
It's
would say that um, if you want to enjoy some very quick profits on, say, a 10% move from Bitcoin, and you want a 100% move, then that's the benefit of the altcoin market for sure. Because it just makes no sense. Like, why would you trade Bitcoin, which you typically have to trade with more capital to make money, when you can just pay attention to what Bitcoin is doing and then jump on an altcoin? But then that is a trap in itself, because I've just suddenly walked into a room which is much more risky.
right. I mean, another benefit is when you're trading Bitcoin only, there's this the fees you really have to take into consideration, especially for these trades where you're trading for minutes, because in order to squeeze the same profit out of a Bitcoin move, you have to use much larger leverage and position size, and you're going to pay a lot more in fees, opening and closing the position, which, I mean, maybe even with the added risk of altcoins, it might even out. I mean, obviously, it's going to depend on where you're trading, but it is very significant when you're comparing trading Bitcoin to make, you know, $2,000 profit compared to an altcoin. The fees are massive, and they might take your $2,000 profit down to like 1,400.
Yeah, I think the other way I look at it is, because Bitcoin is such a playful beast, in the fact that it enjoys going against probabilities. And we see a lot of, just you look at some of the triangle patterns which we've seen recently, just little insignificant triangle patterns where Bitcoin just goes, I know this is a triangle pattern. I'm going to disrespect it. I'm going to go up and then through it and then down. And I'm just going to show you, you don't know what you're doing. And for me, so trading altcoins allows just a little bit of latency between what Bitcoin does and then how the market reacts, which for me just gives me a minute to just breathe and then just make a decision, as opposed to, oh, I'm trading Bitcoin, well, Bitcoin's going. And so that's the way I look at it. What What's the biggest lesson? And you talked about this reef trade, right? What's the biggest, because I think anyone paying attention to this, looking about altcoins, has had probably a bad altcoin trade, right? What's the biggest lesson you personally have learned, do you think, from a bad altcoin trade? What was the aha moment? I mustn't ever do that again. Do you have one of those?
I think I'm like picturing in my head physically what the chart looks like on like my biggest regrets. And usually it looks like nothing you've ever seen before. And usually it looks something like this. If the chart looks something like this, where you end up being interested only because it's something you've never seen before, chances are the outcome of your trade is going to be something you've never expected to see either. Because I mean, we have to think about how the market moves. Its purpose is to liquidate as many people as possible. And when you're thinking, "Wow, that's amazing," XRP is gained 500% in the past week. It must be going higher. So is everybody else. And when the chart looks like nothing you've ever seen before, it's going to trade like nothing you've ever seen before as well. If it, for example, looks like Bitcoin, where it's more predictable, and yes, it's going to have some, months where it's just this, but oftentimes you're going to be trading during the ranging moments or the moments that look a little bit more like a market, then you can expect to not have to face such an extreme learning lesson when it disrespects everything else once again, after disrespecting everything to be so bullish.
Yeah, and what do you? I mean, I think we're kind of touching on this based on your description of just because obviously I've been desperate over the last few weeks for Bitcoin to put in like a higher low because its price action was like a house of cards to a degree, and it's very difficult to trade that because what comes up must come down. So when you see these, what do you prefer? Do you prefer, and I think you've answered this question, but do you prefer um, these sort of these sort of altcoins which will just go to the moon and you just try and like just buy them a little bit when they're just very low with not much with not much fundamental price action. I mean, for me, I don't trade those because it's like, how do you trade just a line of green candles, or do you
Exactly.
prefer the more organic price movement? And then which is best? I mean, my view is I prefer organic price movement because I can get probabilities in my favor. Whereas if I see seven green candles, right, am I what am I doing with this? Right, I'm just using fibs to figure out where it's going to stop. But if it's a low
Mhm.
cap, the maths isn't going to really help me. So I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, you have to think about it in the concept of liquidity. When you have those gigantic green candles, or even if they're red, you can just imagine stop loss is all the way on the way up, and it's going to be most appealing for it to do what? Smash everybody with the stop loss there. So you can almost use gigantic green candles as the opposite of what you're thinking. Somebody less experienced might see that and assume, okay, looks like it wants to go up. It's gone up for 5 days straight. Well, most of the time, something like that is actually a signal that it wants to go down and reverse that entire move up, liquidate everybody who put their stop losses on the way up, because that's just the way that the market moves.
Yeah, and I think you touched on a great point, which my mentor used to underscore all the time, which was everyone's trying to take your money, right?
Yeah.
Everyone's trying to take your money. And
Yep.
if you look at a altcoin setup and you go, oh, look at this, look at this, 100%, I got to get in on this. If you're thinking like that, you are two steps away from getting wrecked, right? Whereas you want to be looking at it like, look at all these fools. I'm just joking, of course, but look at all these. I've been there. I've been the fool, right? We've all been
Yeah.
the fool. Look at
Yeah.
all these people chasing that green with probably market orders and not limit orders, just trying to get in somehow on the action. And
Hmm.
then me and you are just sitting there waiting. Yeah, I'm going to wait for 2 weeks for it to cool back down because I'm pretty sure it's coming back to exactly where it lifted off from, right? And that's our play.
Yeah.
I mean,
Usually it's not 2 weeks. Usually it literally is like an instant change in direction.
yeah, it's hi everyone. Hi, oh, bye. That's what it is. That's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
Any altcoins which you have believed in early and paid off big? BNB, which is not really, it's an exchange token, but BNB was good to me for sure. Any ones which have really helped you out over the last year or so?
XRP.
XRP. XRP is a really good example, actually. So, why do you like XRP so much?
XRP has it has a good balance between proposed tech. There's a lot of rumors about all this tech that they could be integrating. I remember at one point people said there was going to be like Twitter Pay and it was going to run on XRP. I still don't think there's really been any developments there, but having that kind of hype is very healthy actually for a coin like that because you don't usually hear a lot of negative things about it. Usually what you're hearing is people fantasizing and almost inventing these technologies, all this hype about it, because everybody is just so optimistic about it. It has a long time of price history, and it almost somewhat seemed safe back in the day because it moved so little. It was literally just a straight line for like cycles. And it seemed like, okay, well, it seems like, not a totally scary place to put my money in. It has a lot of hype around it, maybe it could have some potential. And it turns out it did have quite a bit.
Yeah, XRP. Well, actually, I mean, moving to portfolios. I mean, I had XRP in my bag last cycle, and it was actually it was. It's difficult to say 10x is a bad performer. right? It's difficult to say that, but it was the worst performer,
It
and
was.
I think this probably touches base on this question in terms of like what does a good portfolio look like, right? Because there's intraday trading, there's medium-term trading, but the reality of crypto is that if you buy at the right time in the 4-year cycle, presuming there's no trade war or anything going on, or a pandemic or whatever's coming next, then typically that's the easiest way to make money. So for me, my portfolio was quite straightforward. I had a bit of Ethereum, I had BNB at the time, Bitcoin. I had Bitcoin, and I can't remember what the other one was. That's bugging me a little bit. And there's a bit. I think I was looking at privacy tokens. I was looking at having something in the DeFi. I was having a little foot in everything. So, what would be your advice to people who just simply want to invest in altcoins? I mean, how do you think they should diversify their portfolio?
Well, one thing that I like to do is open up almost a split chart. On one side have Bitcoin, on the other side have whatever coin you're looking to add to your portfolio, and just see, did it follow the course of the cycle? Because some of them did not. Some of them obviously didn't exist to even make it through one cycle. Some of them didn't exist to make it through two cycles. Some of them were created at the top of one cycle and they've only dumped ever since. If you can go side by side and you can see this altcoin, not only did it follow Bitcoin's cycle roughly, but it also increased in percentage significantly more because it's lower cap. That seems like a really good place to put your money in the case of, trying to time the market as far as getting in at the low point of a cycle, getting out at a higher point of the cycle. So taking a look at that split chart, seeing has it actually respected the cycles is a good indication of whether it's going to do that again.
Yeah, and is there any part of the space which you could just say don't go near it? Is there any part of the space that you just don't touch?
Yes, that would be the pump.fun, the meme coins where there's 60 being created every minute. That is usually the place where, of course, we can make the argument that only a small percentage of traders make money, but there it's a significantly smaller percentage of people who actually come out profitable when you're in these sketchy, super meme based markets. Obviously, you hear these stories of people, making insane fortunes in seconds through them, but at the same time, it's not like they're sharing their strategy if they had one. You could almost assume that they've lost thousands to tens of thousands leading up until that point. And yes, they've had their big break, but you almost think about it like a lottery.
Yeah.
The house
Yes,
always
absolutely.
wins.
And this is the thing. It's like Dogecoin, Pepe, all of these things, dog with hat, right? They're jokes, but they're not jokes anymore because like who needs a use case if everybody's using them, right?
Right,
And I
right.
think that's the issue. So we're looking for established tokens. We're probably backing off the position that meme coins are terrible and should be avoided now because that's essentially where, there's a lot of activity at the moment. But the ideal balance, of course, is to try and find tokens which have got previous price history, have been around for a while, probably have a use case, but also have a good big community with them. And you might be thinking, and if you look at it like that, then you're like, okay, so I like this token, the TA is good, but I'm not convinced by the community. It's a really big, we haven't got price history, so I'm going to avoid this because I can find, and you will find a token which fits your criteria.
Absolutely.
And I think maybe it's all about just don't be don't be quick to jump in on something you've just heard on the radio, but don't ignore it either, right? Just be like, I can't believe I just said on the radio. I'm like, I don't even listen to the radio. What's that about? I caught myself saying that. I'm like, what? What are you talking about? Digital radio, like Sirius XM, something like that, whatever. On YouTube, wherever
Just
you
the
get your
Instagram reels.
whenever you get your information. It's just you simply have to do your own due diligence. And I think if people just realize they have to do that, even just for a breath, even just for a minute, they automatically increase the chances that they won't get wrecked. I mean, do you agree with that?
I could not agree more,
So
except for the
perhaps
radio part.
I mean, yeah, yeah, and perhaps that's just the thing. It's just, but people just look at what you're doing. Treat an investment or a trade for what it is. It is a trade, an investment, a serious thing which you need to take into account. And if you just make sure, you've got some previous price history, you've got a good balance between hype because hype brings attention. right? A good balance between hype and use case, previous price action, and obviously an appropriate market cap, right? So you can actually have some decent trades. And I think that's probably the best advice we can give. I mean, before we head off, I've got these very silly questions. If you could give one altcoin a personality, which would be the class clown? I mean, what is the class clown right now? What is the joke right now, do you think?
It's probably something like Pepe, where it has a gigantic community that is so tight knit, where they have like posters of it on the wall. And when we were talking about community, I don't want people to get confused with community being people like that. Community could just be like the number of people who know about it, but some of these have literal cult-like followings where people have posters on the wall. They fantasize about, these tokens, and usually it's not in the context of short-term trading. Usually it's these people who are extremely bullish long-term on tokens like this. And those are usually the class clowns because, yes, most of the time they have quite a bit of price history and they do follow TA. But the thing is, it's pretty easy to make fun of them when when the audience is in such a space as they are.
Yeah. Again, and I think people listening to this are kind of like, this is a difficult space to navigate. This is difficult. This is quite challenging. And again, maybe the first thing you just need to take from this podcast is just recognize it's challenging. Know that you're walking into potentially a difficult environment in terms of trading. It's not Apple stock. It's not Alphabet, right? We need to have a different strategy and maybe recognize that if you don't have the necessary experience trading, then go get some experience, get some help. And this is why we're here at Hola Prime and Hola Prime X, because we have all these great coaches, we've got all this great coverage, people like yourself cranking out these amazing shorts with all these tips and information, every week. And I think maybe that's it. Recognize you need to learn, and then be prepared to take other people's money as opposed to the other way around, which will happen if you enter the market. Before I do the closing, any final thoughts, Grant? It's been so good to talk to you again today. Anything you want to share with people, which we haven't covered?
It's been great, and I can't think of anything else. I think we covered quite a bit today. And if you take action on everything we said, you're gonna lose a lot less money. I almost feel
Yes.
like if somebody was to make any trading indicator, the most profitable one for traders who are kind of like the ones we're talking about today would be like an indicator of how long the price history is and whether or not it's followed a cycle before. Literally, it's just like a binary green or red. That would be an incredible indicator.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good takeaway. And perhaps the other one is that not all altcoins are created equal, and recognize that. And chasing green candles without a game plan, of course, is again a fast track to losses. But with the right strategy, research, and risk management, I think you can turn altcoin volatility into an opportunity. Well, I know that because that's what we do. That's what I do. So thanks for tuning in, whether you are listening from the radio, or you're listening from your trading desk or on your couch. I'll never live that down. We appreciate you being part of the community. We're really trying to grow this at Hola Prime X. We also have a Discord server, and of course, as we've insinuated, me and Grant are providing market coverage throughout the week. So make sure you subscribe and like, comment, and share. And don't forget to check out top altcoin picks every Wednesday on Hola Prime X as we go through some of the best setups to help you. Rather help you not have to do so much work. But that's great. Grant, thanks again. Great to see you. But for everybody else, until next time, thank you so much. Catch you in the next one.
Hola Prime, trade with transparency.